Emma Clark brushed her blonde hair from her face as the metal door slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed through the small concrete cell, a stark reminder that this would be her home for the next 18 months. At 23, she was the youngest inmate in this wing of Blackwater Women's Correctional Facility. "Home, sweet home," she muttered, surveying the austere surroundings. A metal bed with a thin mattress, a stainless steel toilet without a seat, and a small desk bolted to the wall. The only window was a narrow slit high on the wall, barely allowing a sliver of natural light to penetrate the gloom. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, wincing at its unyielding firmness. First-time offender, sentenced for a crime she hadn't committed. Her lawyer had advised her to take the plea deal. Embezzlement charges would have carried a much harsher sentence if she'd fought and lost. Better to accept responsibility for the accounting error than risk years behind bars. The first night passed in fitful bursts of sleep, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds, distant screams, guards' boots on concrete, the constant hum of the facility's ventilation system. By morning, Emma's eyes were rimmed with dark circles, her body tense from the uncomfortable mattress. During breakfast in the communal hall, she kept to herself, aware of the curious and sometimes predatory glances from other inmates. A tall woman with elaborate tattoos covering her arms slid onto the bench across from her. "Fresh meat," the woman said, her voice surprisingly soft for her intimidating appearance. "I'm Darlene. Listen up. You'll need friends in here if you want to make it through your sentence without trouble." Emma nodded cautiously. "I'm Emma, just trying to keep my head down and do my time." Darlene laughed. "That's what everyone says on day one. See how you feel after a month of this place getting under your skin." She leaned forward. "What cell did they put you in?" "Block D, cell 213. Darlene's expression changed subtly. 213. You're in Marlene's old cell." "Who's Marlene?" Darlene glanced around before answering. "She was found dead in that cell 3 months ago. Official report says suicide, but..." She trailed off meaningfully. "But what?" Emma pressed. But Marlene was counting down the days. 2 weeks left on her sentence. Nobody believed she'd kill herself, not when she talked constantly about seeing her kids again. Emma felt a chill despite the overheated cafeteria. "So what happened to her?" Darlene shrugged. "Guards found her hanging from the ceiling vent one morning. Thing is, nobody heard a thing that night, and Marlene wasn't exactly the quiet type." A guard approached their table, cutting the conversation short. "Time's up, ladies. Back to your cells for morning count." That afternoon, Emma examined her cell more carefully. The faint outline of writing caught her eye near the base of the wall behind her bed. She pushed the metal frame aside a few inches and crouched down to look closer. Someone had scratched tiny words into the concrete. "It's in the walls." Emma ran her fingers over the etched letters. They were deep and deliberate, as if carved with great urgency. She pushed the bed further to reveal more writing. "They come at 3 a.m. They take you through..." "Through what?" Emma whispered to herself. She spent the rest of the day wondering about Marlene and the cryptic message. At dinner, she tried to find Darlene, but the tattooed woman was nowhere to be seen. "Looking for someone?" A petite redhead with freckles asked from the next table. "Darlene," Emma replied. "Talked to her at breakfast." The redhead, who introduced herself as Becky, shook her head. "Darlene's in solitary. Got into it with a guard after lunch. Won't see her for at least a week." Emma felt oddly vulnerable without her only acquaintance. "Do you know anything about cell 213? Or someone named Marlene?" Becky's face paled visibly. "Why are you asking about that?" "Because it's my cell now, and I found some weird writing behind the bed." "Listen," Becky said, lowering her voice. "There's been 3 deaths in that cell over the past 2 years, all ruled suicides, all found the same way. Some of us think that cell is wrong somehow." "Wrong how?" "People hear things at night. scratching sounds, whispering. The woman in the cell before Marlene said she kept waking up with scratches on her arms that she didn't remember getting. Emma's appetite vanished. Why hasn't anyone reported this? Becky gave her a pitying, "Look, who's going to believe a bunch of convicts saying a cell is haunted? Besides, the warden doesn't like trouble. People who make noise about conditions here tend to have accidents." Back in her cell that night, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the messages and Becky's warnings. She pushed the bed out further and found more writing, this time in a different hand. It watches from the vent. Emma's eyes darted to the small ventilation grate near the ceiling. It was standard institutional size, maybe 8 by 8 inches, covered with a metal mesh that looked secure. She used her desk chair to stand on and peer into it, but could see nothing beyond the darkness of the duct. As lights out approached, Emma felt increasingly uneasy. She made a decision to stay awake as long as possible, particularly as 3 a.m. neared. She had smuggled a plastic spoon from dinner, which she kept clutched in her hand. A pathetic weapon, but better than nothing. The facility went quiet after midnight. The only sounds the occasional footsteps of guards making their rounds. Emma checked her watch periodically as the hours crept by. 1:27 a.m., 2:15 a.m., 2:48 a.m. At 2:55 a.m., the temperature in the cell dropped noticeably. Emma's breath formed small clouds in the suddenly frigid air. She sat up rigidly on her bed, eyes fixed on the vent. 2:58 a.m. A faint scratching sound began, like fingernails dragging slowly across metal. It seemed to come from inside the ventilation duct. 2:59 a.m. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the vent, plastic spoon clutched so tightly in her hand that her knuckles turned white. 3:00 a.m. The light from the corridor flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. In the pitch blackness, Emma heard a new sound, a wet, sliding noise, like something damp and heavy moving through the vent shaft. And then she saw it, a pale glow emanating from the vent grate, illuminating a small portion of her cell. With growing horror, Emma watched as something began to push against the metal mesh from the inside. The metal grate bulged outward as something pushed against it from within the ventilation shaft. Emma scrambled backward until her spine pressed against the cold concrete wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The plastic spoon in her hand seemed absurdly inadequate now. A thin, elongated finger, bone white and unnaturally jointed, slipped through one of the mesh openings, followed by another and another. They curled around the edges of the grate like pale spiders, exerting pressure. The metal began to groan. Emma wanted to scream, but terror had frozen her vocal cords. The fingers, there were at least 6 of them now, continued to work at the grate, bending the metal with impossible strength. Just as the grate seemed about to give way, the corridor lights flickered back on. Immediately, the fingers retracted into the vent with a sound like rushing wind. The temperature in the cell gradually returned to normal, leaving Emma shaking and soaked in cold sweat. She didn't sleep for what remained of the night, keeping her eyes fixed on the vent until the first announcement signaled the start of a new day. In the harsh fluorescent light of morning, she examined the vent again. The grate appeared untouched, with no sign of the bending or stress she had witnessed. Had she hallucinated the entire episode? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Emma wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. During morning exercise in the yard, Emma sought out Becky, desperate to share her experience with someone who might believe her. "It happened," she whispered urgently when they were away from the guards. "Something tried to come through the vent last night, just like the writing said." Becky's freckles stood out starkly against her suddenly pale face. "What did it look like?" "I only saw fingers. Long, white fingers. Too many of them." Becky crossed herself, a gesture that seemed oddly formal in the prison yard. "That's what Marlene described to me before she died. She called them the pale ones. Said they'd been watching her for weeks before they finally tried to take her. Take her where? She didn't know. Just said they wanted to take her through, like the writing you found. Becky glanced around, nervously. Listen, you need to request a cell transfer. Tell them you're having panic attacks in enclosed spaces or something. Emma nodded. I'll try after lunch. But her request was summarily denied by the prison administrator, a stern woman with steel gray hair and glasses that magnified her cold eyes. We don't accommodate cell transfers based on inmate preferences, Clark, she said without looking up from her paperwork, especially not for new arrivals. It's not a preference, Emma insisted. There's something wrong with that cell. Other inmates have died there. The administrator, Ms. Prentice, according to the nameplate on her desk, finally met Emma's gaze. 3 suicides in 2 years in a women's maximum security facility is hardly unusual, Ms. Clark. Depression and mental illness are common among the incarcerated population. But nothing, Prentice cut her off. Return to your assigned cell and focus on your rehabilitation programs. This meeting is over. As a guard escorted her back to D Block, Emma felt desperation mounting. The thought of spending another night in cell 213 made her stomach churn with dread. Late that afternoon, a guard Emma hadn't seen before brought her a small package. Library privileges, the guard explained gruffly. Previous occupant of your cell left some books behind. Thought you might want them. Emma thanked her and examined the package after the guard left. It contained 3 worn paperback novels and a small notebook with a faded blue cover. The novels were standard prison fare, dog-eared romance and mystery novels, but the notebook drew her attention. It contained journal entries dated over several months. The handwriting matched some of the etchings Emma had found on the wall, Marlene's journal. Emma quickly flipped through the pages, her heart racing. The early entries were mundane reflections on prison life, complaints about food and thoughts about Marlene's children, but about halfway through the tone changed dramatically. April 12th. Something watches me while I sleep. I can feel its eyes on me. Guard says nothing's there. April 18th. Scratching in the walls again tonight. Not mice. Too deliberate. Too rhythmic. April 24th. Woke up with scratches on my arms. 3 parallel lines, deep. Nurse says I did it myself in my sleep. I know I didn't. May 3rd. It's in the vent. I saw its eyes tonight, glowing like pale blue fire. I screamed, but no one came. The entries grew increasingly frantic and disjointed, the handwriting becoming more erratic. The final entry, dated just 1 day before Marlene's reported suicide, chilled Emma to her core. May 15th. They'll come for me tonight. I know it. They want to take me through to the other side. They've been preparing my body with the scratches, marking me. If anyone finds this, stay awake. They can only take you if you fall asleep at 3 a.m. I won't sleep. I won't sleep. I won't. The entry ended abruptly, a jagged line trailing off the page as if Marlene had been interrupted mid-sentence. Emma closed the journal, her hands trembling. Marlene had been determined to stay awake, yet somehow she'd ended up dead, allegedly by suicide, the very night she wrote her final entry. No way she killed herself, Emma murmured, tucking the journal under her mattress as footsteps approached. Her cell. A guard appeared at her door. Dinner time, Clark. In the cafeteria, Emma spotted Becky and joined her, keeping her voice low as she described finding Marlene's journal. You need to get rid of it, Becky hissed. If the guards find it, you'll be in trouble for having contraband. But it might be evidence that Marlene didn't kill herself. Becky looked around nervously. Evidence of what, exactly? That some thing came through the ventilation system and took her. Who'd believe that? I don't know what happened to her, Emma admitted. But I know what I saw last night, and it matches what Marlene described. Then you know you can't stay in that cell tonight, Becky said firmly. If they won't transfer you, you need another option. Like what? Like getting yourself thrown in solitary for a night. At least those cells have solid doors, no vents connecting to the main system. Emma considered this. How would I even do that? Start a fight, not with me. I'm not taking a hit for you, but there's a woman named Torres who'll swing at anyone who looks at her wrong. It was a desperate plan, but Emma was feeling increasingly desperate. As dinner concluded, she deliberately bumped into a muscular woman with a shaved head whom Becky had pointed out as Torres. "Watch it, Blondie," Torres growled. Emma steeled herself and did something entirely out of character. She shoved Torres hard. "You watch it." What followed happened so quickly that Emma barely had time to register it. Torres's fist connected with her jaw, sending her sprawling across the floor. Guards rushed in, whistles blaring. Emma tasted blood in her mouth as she was roughly hauled to her feet. But instead of being taken to solitary as she'd hoped, Emma was simply marched back to her cell with a warning. Torres, apparently a repeat offender, was the only one removed from the block. "Perfect disciplinary record gets you one free pass, Clark," the guard informed her. "Next time, you're looking at restricted privileges at minimum." And so, with growing dread, Emma found herself back in cell 213 as night fell. The journal, hidden under her mattress, and the clock ticking inexorably toward 3 a.m. Emma sat on her bed, Marlene's journal open on her lap as she studied the frantic entries again. The lights would go out at 10 p.m., leaving her 5 hours to figure out how to stay awake and defend herself from whatever might come through the vent at 3 a.m. She looked around her cell for anything that might serve as a weapon more effective than a plastic spoon. The options were limited. Everything was designed to prevent self-harm or attacks on guards. Even the legs of her desk chair were firmly bolted to the frame. A new idea formed in her mind. If she couldn't fight whatever was coming, perhaps she could block its entrance. Emma examined the vent more carefully. The grate was secured with 4 small screws, but she had nothing to remove them with. Instead, she tore strips from her thin bedsheet and began weaving them into a tight mesh. When lights out came, Emma was ready with her makeshift barrier. Using the toothpaste she'd been issued as an adhesive, she carefully affixed the woven fabric to the wall around the vent, covering the grate entirely. It wouldn't stop something determined, but it might slow it down. To stay awake, Emma pinched herself hard whenever she felt drowsiness approaching. She recited poetry she had memorized in high school, counted backward from 1,000, and periodically did jumping jacks until her legs ached. 1:30 a.m. The cell block was quiet, except for the occasional cough or snore from other inmates. Emma's eyes burned with fatigue, but fear kept her alert. 2:15 a.m. A guard passed by on routine patrol, flashlight beam briefly illuminating her cell. Before moving on, Emma considered calling out, asking for help, but what would she say? That she was afraid of monsters in the ventilation system. 2:45 a.m. The first sign that something was wrong, the temperature beginning to drop just as it had the night before. Emma's breath fogged in the increasingly frigid air. She pressed herself against the wall farthest from the vent, clutching Marlene's journal to her chest like a talisman. 2:55 a.m. The scratching began, subtle at first, then growing more insistent. Emma watched in horror as her makeshift barrier over the vent began to frost over, ice crystals forming in intricate patterns across the fabric. 2:59 a.m. The corridor. Lights flickered, and Emma's eyes darted to her cell door. Should she scream for help now? Would anyone come? 3:02 a.m. Darkness enveloped the cell block as the lights went out completely. In the pitch blackness, Emma heard the fabric over the vent tear, with a sound like ripping flesh. The pale glow she had seen the previous night returned, stronger now, illuminating her cell with an unearthly blue-white light. "No," Emma whispered, pressing herself harder against the wall. "Please, no." Something pushed through the torn fabric, a hand, but not a human hand. It had too many fingers, each one impossibly long and jointed in too many places. The skin was translucent, almost luminous, with dark veins visible beneath. As Emma watched, paralyzed with terror, a second hand emerged, then something that might have been a head. It was hairless and elongated, with no visible ears or nose, just indentations where these features should be. Its eyes were large, lidless pools of pale blue light, the source of the glow filling her cell. The creature continued to pull itself. Through the small opening with fluid, unsettling movements, its body impossibly thin and flexible. Once fully in her cell, it unfolded to a height of nearly 7 feet, its limbs too long and angular to be human, despite its vaguely humanoid shape. Emma couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature tilted its head as it regarded her, those glowing eyes seeming to look through her rather than at her. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into her mind, its voice, like ice crystals forming in her thoughts. "You are not Marlene." Emma found her voice, though it emerged as barely a whisper. "No, Marlene is dead. Marlene is with us now. Through the passage, you will come too." "What are you?" Emma managed to ask, her voice trembling. "We are the Forgotten. We live between walls, between worlds. We need your warmth, your life." The creature took a step toward her, moving with a fluid grace that defied its awkward proportions. Emma pressed herself harder against the wall, wishing she could pass through it. "Stay back," she warned, though she had nothing to threaten it with. The creature paused, its head tilting in the other direction. "You fear. Good. Fear makes the passage easier." It extended one long arm toward her, those too many fingers. Splayed wide, Emma felt an unnatural cold radiating from it, like standing before an open freezer. In desperation, she flung Marlene's journal at the creature. To her surprise, it recoiled as the book passed through its torso, not like a solid object hitting another solid object, but like the journal had disrupted something essential in the creature's form. For a moment, its body wavered, becoming partially transparent where the book had struck. The creature emitted no sound, but Emma felt its pain and rage in her mind like needles of ice. It retreated a step, its form solidifying again. Emma's mind raced. The journal had affected it somehow. What was different about the journal? Paper, ink, the words themselves? Or was it Marlene's connection to it? The creature advanced again, more cautiously this time. Emma backed away until she reached the cell door, her hand fumbling for the call button that would summon a guard. But when she pressed it, nothing happened. "No help will come," the creature projected. "The passage opens only to us while it lasts." "What passage?" Emma demanded, stalling for time while she tried to think of a way out. "Between your world and ours. It opens at the dark time, when your reality is thinnest. 3 cycles by your count." 3 a.m., Emma realized. Some kind of temporary doorway between dimensions. The creature was closer now, close enough that Emma could feel the deathly cold emanating from its body. Its hand reached for her again, those elongated fingers just inches from her face. In a final desperate move, Emma lunged for her bed and grabbed the thin pillow. Remembering how the journal had disrupted the creature's form, she swung the pillow with all her strength, aiming for the creature's midsection. The effect was immediate and startling. Where the pillow passed through, the creature's body scattered, like smoke, reforming seconds later, but noticeably less solid. Emma didn't understand why ordinary objects affected it, but she didn't question her advantage. She swung again and again, forcing the creature back toward the vent. Stop. It projected, the mental voice weaker now. You do not understand. We need you. You can't have me, Emma growled, continuing her assault. The creature retreated further, its form becoming increasingly transparent with each blow. As it neared the vent, it made one final lunge toward Emma, those long fingers, almost grazing her cheek. The cold of its near touch burned her skin like dry ice. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the encounter ended. The corridor lights flickered back on, and the creature, now little more than a faint outline, was violently sucked back into the vent with a sound like rushing wind. Emma collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, her heart pounding so hard. She thought it might burst from her chest. She touched her cheek where the creature had almost made contact and felt raised welts forming like severe frostbite. When she finally gathered the strength to stand, Emma examined the vent. Her makeshift barrier hung in tatters, and the metal grate was bent outward slightly, evidence that she hadn't imagined the encounter. She retrieved Marlene's journal from where it had fallen and flipped frantically through the pages, looking for anything that might explain what had happened. Near the back, she found several pages filled with research notes rather than diary entries. Marlene had apparently been investigating the phenomena herself during her final weeks. One page contained a crude drawing of the creature, remarkably similar to what Emma had just seen. Another page held what looked like historical research about the prison. Built on site of old tuberculosis sanatorium. Patients kept in isolation. Many died alone. Hospital records say 300+ deaths, but local newspaper reported 1,000+. Mass grave somewhere on grounds? Unmarked. Emma's blood ran cold as she began to understand. The forgotten. Those who had died alone and unacknowledged, their bodies disposed of without ceremony. Souls caught between worlds, perhaps, or transformed into something no longer human by their isolation and suffering. Morning arrived with agonizing slowness. Emma hadn't dared to sleep after the creature's departure, instead spending the remaining hours studying Marlene's journal more carefully. The frostbite-like marks on her cheek had faded to a dull red, easily explained away as a rash if anyone asked. The final pages of the journal contained Marlene's increasingly desperate plans to escape Cell 213. She had requested transfers, feigned illness, even deliberately broken prison rules, hoping for solitary confinement. All strategies Emma had already attempted or considered. None had worked for Marlene, but there was one thing Marlene had discovered that gave Emma a sliver of hope. According to her notes, the creatures, the Forgotten as they called themselves, could only manifest fully during a narrow window around 3 a.m., and they could only take someone who was in the cell at that precise time. Just need to not be there at 3 a.m., Emma murmured to herself as she headed to breakfast. Somehow, in the cafeteria, she was relieved to see Becky already seated at their usual table. But before Emma could reach her, a guard intercepted her path. Clark, you've got a visitor. Legal counsel, this way. Confused, Emma followed the guard to the visitation area. She wasn't expecting her lawyer. Their last conversation had ended with him advising her to get comfortable for her 18-month sentence. In the small meeting room sat not her regular attorney, but an older woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore an expensive-looking suit and had piercing dark eyes that assessed Emma critically as she entered. Ms. Clark, I'm Margaret Winters, the woman said once the guard had left them alone. I've been retained to review your case for potential appeal. Emma sat down across from her. By whom? I can't afford a new lawyer. Let's just say an interested. Your party believes there were irregularities in your trial. Winters placed a sleek briefcase on the table and extracted a folder. But before we discuss your case, I understand you're currently housed in Cell 213, Block D. Emma stiffened. How do you know that? Winters' expression remained neutral. It's relevant to your situation. That particular cell has a history. The suicides, Emma said. 3 women in 2 years. 4, actually, Winters corrected. The most recent being Marlene Rodriguez 3 months ago. Before her was Patricia Way, Janet Kosowski, and Teresa Alvarez. Emma leaned forward. You believe they didn't kill themselves? For the first time, Winters' professional demeanor cracked slightly. What I believe is that Blackwater Correctional was built on the grounds of the old Blackwater Sanatorium, which closed in 1952 following investigations into patient mistreatment and unexplained deaths. Cell Block D stands directly over what was once the sanatorium's isolation ward. The Forgotten, Emma whispered. Winters raised an eyebrow. So you've encountered them. Emma's mind reeled. This wasn't a standard attorney visit. Who are you, really? And who sent you? I'm exactly who I said I am, an attorney. But I also serve as counsel to a group that monitors unusual activities at certain locations. Prisons built on sites with troubled histories often experience phenomena that defy conventional explanation. Like pale creatures that come through. Events at 3 a.m. and try to drag people to another dimension, Emma asked, unable to keep the edge of hysteria from her voice. Precisely like that. Winters nodded, showing no surprise. The Forgotten, as you called them, were once patients who died unacknowledged and unmourned. Over decades, their collective suffering has transformed into something else. They exist in a space between dimensions, and they crave connection with the living. They tried to take me last night, Emma said, showing the faint marks on her cheek. Winters examined the marks with concern. You're lucky. Once they make full contact, the process begins. Gradually, night after night, they prepare the body for transition. The scratches Marlene mentioned in her journal, Emma realized. But I fought it off. I discovered they can be disrupted by physical objects. Temporarily, Winters cautioned. But they're persistent. They'll return tonight, stronger and more prepared for resistance. How do you know all this? Winters hesitated before responding. Because my sister was Teresa Alvarez, the first woman to die in that cell during this cycle. The official report called it suicide, but I knew better. Teresa was a fighter. She would never have taken her own life, especially with only 2 months. Left on her sentence, Emma felt a surge of compassion for the stern woman across from her. I'm sorry. After Teresa's death, I began investigating, found patterns, connections, other deaths at other institutions built on sites of mass suffering. I joined with others who had lost loved ones under similar circumstances. And you think I'm next, Emma stated flatly. Unless we intervene, yes. Winters opened her briefcase again and removed what looked like legal documents. Which brings me to the actual purpose of my visit. I've filed an emergency motion for your temporary release pending appeal review. Emma's heart leapt. Can you do that? In extraordinary circumstances, with the right connections and sufficient evidence of trial irregularities? Yes. But there weren't any irregularities in my trial, Emma admitted. I took a plea deal because I couldn't prove my innocence. I'm aware, Winters said, sliding the papers toward Emma. But what matters is creating a legal justification to get you out of Cell 213 before tonight. The judge who'll review this motion owes me a favor, and the warden will receive the order by this afternoon. Emma scanned the documents, which contained detailed arguments about evidence mishandling and witness credibility issues that had never actually occurred. This is all fabricated. It only needs to hold up long enough to get you transferred to county lockup for the appeal process. once. You're out of cell 213, we can drop the appeal, and you'll be assigned a different cell when you return. Oh dear, why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Winter's expression softened slightly, because no one believed Teresa when she said something was coming for her through the walls, because the prison administration has buried 4 deaths rather than acknowledge there's something wrong with that cell, and because if we don't break the cycle, someone else will be assigned to 213 after you're gone. Emma signed the documents with hands that trembled slightly. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm still in that cell tonight? Winters reached into her pocket and pressed something into Emma's palm, a small silver pendant on a thin chain. If you can't avoid being in the cell at 3 a.m., wear this. It's silver from the old sanatorium's foundation stones, melted down and reforged with binding incantations. Emma stared at the pendant, which bore strange symbols she didn't recognize. You believe this will protect me? It creates a barrier they cannot cross. My group has tested similar items at other sites. Winters closed her briefcase. Hide it until you need it. And Emma, whatever happens, don't fall asleep at 3 a.m. That's when your mind is most vulnerable to their influence. After Winters left, Emma was escorted back to her cell, the pendant hidden in her mouth, until she could conceal it under her mattress. She spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, watching the clock and hoping Winters' legal maneuver would succeed. At 4:30 p.m., she was summoned to the administrative offices. The warden, a severe man with cold eyes, looked displeased as he reviewed documents on his desk. Miss Clark, it seems you have friends in high places. Judge Morrison has ordered your temporary release to county custody for appeal proceedings. He slid a form toward her. Sign here to acknowledge transfer scheduled for 7 p.m. today. Relief flooded through Emma as she signed, her hands steadier now. She would be long gone before 3 a.m., but at 6:15 p.m., as she waited with her few belongings packed, an alarm blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors as guards rushed past her cell. "Lock down," a voice announced over the PA system. "All inmates return to cells immediately. This is not a drill." Emma stood frozen as her cell door automatically closed and locked. Through her small window, she could see guards escorting staff members toward the exits. "What's happening?" she called to a passing guard. "Gas leak in the east wing," he replied tersely. "Facility evacuation for all non-essential personnel. Inmates remain secured until further notice." Horror slowly dawned on Emma as she realized what this meant. No transfer tonight. She would be locked in cell 213 when 3 a.m. came. As night fell, the facility grew eerily quiet. Without the usual complement of guards, the only sounds were distant inmates calling to each other about the lockdown. Emma retrieved the silver pendant from under her mattress and placed it around her neck, tucking it beneath her prison uniform. She prepared as best she could, pushing her bed against the far wall and gathering anything that might serve as a weapon. The hours ticked by with excruciating slowness. 1:30 a.m. The facility remained on lockdown, minimal staff present. 2:15 a.m. Emma touched the pendant through her shirt, drawing comfort from its solid presence. 2:45 a.m. The temperature began to drop, her breath clouding in the increasingly frigid air. 2:55 a.m. The familiar scratching started, more aggressive than before, as if fueled by frustration and hunger. 2:59 a.m. The corridor lights flickered, and Emma gripped the edge of her bed, the pendant now pulled out and clearly visible on her chest. 3 a.m. Darkness engulfed the cell block. In the pitch black, Emma heard the vent grate tear free from the wall completely, clattering to the floor. The pale blue glow returned, stronger than before, illuminating not one but 3 of the creatures as they slithered through the now open vent. They unfolded their impossibly long limbs in her cell, their lidless eyes fixed on her with cold intensity. Emma clutched the pendant, holding it toward them like a shield. "We have waited." Their collective thoughts pierced her mind. "You will join the others now." "Stay back," Emma warned, backing against the wall. "I'm protected." The creatures paused, their gaze shifting to the pendant. Emma felt their collective hatred and fear radiating toward the silver object. "Stone. Of our prison, one projected. It cannot save you forever." They began to circle her, moving along the walls and ceiling with inhuman grace, looking for a way past the pendant's protection. Emma kept turning, keeping the silver charm between her and the nearest creature. One lunged suddenly from behind, its long fingers stretching toward her neck. Emma spun, thrusting the pendant toward it. Where the silver came near, the creature's form dispersed like smoke, reforming several feet away. The passage closes soon, another projected urgently. She must come now. The third creature, larger than the others, its eyes a deeper blue, moved to the cell door and placed its palm against the lock. Frost spread rapidly from its touch, encasing the locking mechanism. With a sharp crack, the metal shattered. Emma's heart sank as she realized their strategy. They couldn't touch her while she held the pendant, but they could force her to move, right into their grasp. The cell door swung open. Freedom beckoned just beyond, but Emma knew she couldn't reach it without passing the creatures that now positioned themselves strategically around the small space. As 3:15 a.m. approached, the creatures grew more desperate, their movements more erratic. Emma felt their time window closing. "Come," they projected together, their mental voice taking on an almost pleading quality. "We are lonely, we are forgotten. Join us." "No," Emma said firmly, still holding the pendant before her. "Go back to your world and leave me alone." The pendant began to glow with a warm golden light, responding to her defiance. The creatures recoiled further, their forms becoming less substantial as the minutes ticked by. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the corridor lights flickered back to life. The creatures writhed in the sudden illumination, their forms evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. The largest one locked eyes with Emma one final time before it was violently pulled back toward the vent. "We will wait," it projected as it disappeared. "We are patient. We have eternity." Then they were gone, leaving only a shattered lock and a bent vent grate as evidence of their visit. Emma sank to the floor, trembling with exhaustion and delayed fear, the pendant still clutched in her hand. She had survived the night, but Winter's words echoed in her mind. They're persistent. At dawn, guards discovered her cell door damaged and moved her to temporary housing in the medical wing while repairs were made. Emma slipped Marlene's journal to Becky during breakfast, along with a hastily scribbled note explaining what had happened and warning her to share the information. 3 days later, Emma was summoned to the administrative offices again. The warden informed her that despite the lockdown delay, her transfer order remained valid. She would be moved to county custody that afternoon for appeal proceedings. As she was escorted out of Blackwater Correctional, Emma caught sight of Margaret Winters waiting in the parking lot beside a sleek black car. The attorney gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. Emma touched the silver pendant, still hidden beneath her shirt. She had survived cell 213, but she knew the Forgotten would continue to seek new victims as long as the prison remained. One way or another, she would find a way to stop them permanently, to give peace to those lost souls and prevent more deaths. Because if she had learned anything from her ordeal, it was that no one deserved to be forgotten.